Europe has barely recovered from the horror of the Paris attacks last November, and now they're faced with another strike. This time, it's in the heart, Brussels, the capital of Belgium. The horrific attacks in Brussels has again raised the issue of safety and security at airports. So what is the best response and ultimately the best defense? Joining us now is Daniel Wagner. He's the CEO of Country Risk Solutions and author of Managing Country Risk. Welcome to the program.
Good to be with you, Danielle.
Now, if the attacks didn't happen at the airport, would they have just shifted elsewhere?
So these terrorists tend to operate based on opportunity, and they obviously want to create the most bang for the buck. So metro stations and airports are certainly targets of choice, but they could just as easily repeated what was done in Madrid, for example, with trains or with what was done in London with the bus. It really, in my mind, serves to emphasize how vulnerable we all are because there just aren't security protocols that would protect us as we might like to be protected.
So what does that mean for security? Do we need it everywhere? Subways, malls? What do you think?
I think it depends on your frame of reference. So I used to live in Manila in the Philippines, and there you could not go into a shopping center, a movie theater, certainly not into an office building without having your bags checked. And while that provided a sense of comfort about the level of security, it wasn't 100%. But what it did do was raise the bar in terms of what people are accustomed to for the security protocol. I would suggest that it may not take more than one or two similar attacks in the US for the public to basically say, you know what, I'm ready to be inconvenienced a little bit in order to upgrade my potential safety.
Now, of course, we can't completely rely on the government to keep us safe everywhere. So is there anyone looking into other means, like, say, technology that can detect explosives or
So those
other ideas?
technologies are being upgraded all the time, as you might imagine. I think the real challenge in my mind is to what extent can governments keep up with the need to upgrade those technologies? They have to get the financing, they have to get the requisition, they have to be able to find a vendor on a competitive basis and then put it into place. And for that reason, I would suggest that we presume that at some point in time, as regrettable as it may be, we may have a similar problem in the US. And we should start thinking about it in those terms now so that we can put the protocols in place 6 or 12 months from now so that when the time comes, we can just plug it in.
Now, I mentioned, we probably can't afford to do it through the government entirely. Perhaps is this something that we might have to companies might have to look into on the private sector?
Yeah, this is an important point, Danielle. I'm glad you raised it. The idea of public-private partnerships and the need for the private sector to partner with the public sector in order to come up with solutions. Neither one of those sectors by themselves can do it alone. So you need the money, the resources, the individuals to be able to put a comprehensive plan in place. And I would suggest that it's really advisable for businesses to start thinking about the kinds of resources they need to devote in order to solve this problem in conjunction with the government.
I want to talk about an article you wrote about Israel's airport, Tel Aviv Ben Gurion. Tell me about security there.
So the Israelis, as you might imagine, have nearly perfected the art of security on airplanes and in airports. And it's a fairly burdensome, cumbersome process in the sense that it requires passengers to stand in additional lines and go through additional levels of screening. This very often involves something that we don't do at all in this country and really is not done in Europe either, and that is behavioral cues. To what extent is someone who's interviewing a potential passenger tipped off by sweating or eye movements or other forms of behavior that might indicate that there's a problem? They're very good at doing that. That's just one of the things that they do. But I would suggest that that is something, if we really wanted to upgrade our security in airlines and at airports, that we would be doing something like that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't the TSA already have BDOs, the behavioral detection officers at the airports?
Well, if they do, they're not interviewing passengers on a routine basis. Everyone who gets on El Al is interviewed. Everyone is
Okay.
interviewed. So it's one thing to do it on a random basis. And it's interesting, I was speaking with somebody the other day about this, and I was suggesting that one thing that we could really do is enhance the security protocol before you even get in the terminal, which means that baggage and individuals would be screened before they could walk in the terminal, which would prevent what happened in Brussels. Now, you talk about inconvenience and an extra layer of security, extra cost, all of that would be implied. But think of the peace of mind that you might have when you walk into a terminal after having done that. This is what I'm talking about raising the bar for people collectively to say, oh, I really don't want to do that. Change from that to say, you know what, if it's going to secure me and all of us collectively, I'll stand in that extra line.
So what do you think Europe and the U.S. could learn from the way the Israelis operate at their airport? Is it practical here in the U.S.?
Well, you could say that it's one thing to do it at Ben Gurion, and for a relatively small state like Israel, of course, El Al flies all over the world. So, they have a global operation in place and they've devoted the resources necessary to do that. I think some things just short of that could be done, which I think would enhance our effectiveness. For example, in terms of intelligence sharing, how many times have you heard of a plane having taken off and there was a passenger that they think maybe shouldn't be on there? And the reason that they only figured it out after it took off was because that passenger was determined to be on there after the airline had compared the list that it might have been given by the TSA or an intelligence agency. So if there was better intelligence sharing on the ground in a more efficient way, I think that would go a long way toward helping solve that particular problem. But another thing, if you look at the German wings example, which doesn't have to do with terrorism, but with cockpit security, you should never have less than 2 people in the cockpit at any one time, because we saw what happened there. These are simple things, relatively cost-effective things that could be done, and yet we don't see a lot of airlines doing it.
I want to talk about Europe for a minute. They've been the focus now for ISIS for some time. Why do you think Europe is an attractive target for terrorists?
Well, the biggest reason I would suggest is the Schengen Agreement, the open borders, which basically means that individuals can pass through individual European countries without showing their passport. That's a big green light for terrorists to basically say, I can not only go to a country of choice, but choose a target of choice almost at will. Really astonishing, if you think about it, that 4 months after the attacks in Paris happened, we have this horrific double set of attacks in Brussels, knowing who the individuals were, part of the individuals at least, who were suspect. And the very idea that you could have such advanced intelligence and police capabilities and these individuals could slip right through the dragnet, it's really disconcerting.
I think it really highlights the fact that there needs to be more communication within Europe and also with the United States. They need to share more intelligence, and I think that's been a big criticism for Belgium, at least.
Well, certainly it's not just across the Atlantic, but it's also among themselves. I think that, it doesn't take too many attacks like this to focus the minds. I listened to an interview this morning from a Belgian minister, and she was asked a similar question, and she basically said, yeah, we need to pay a lot more attention and devote a lot more resources to this. So they know in part they have themselves to blame, and I'm sure the Belgian people aren't real happy about it.
Yeah, lots to learn from, and hopefully we'll continue to make some progress and prevent more terrorism. Daniel Wagner, thank you so much for joining us today.
A pleasure.